I'm committed. I'm committed. All right. That don't bother me.
Ah, yes, OGP, the One Giant Podcast, back in action on a Friday preview, going out as we look ahead to the Washington football team, end of the season. But I'm one of your co-hosts, Adam Armbrecht, and over there, do you remember? Can you even see him through the tan that is glistening in the Florida sun, the sunshine of summer warming his bones? Andy Makowitz, healthy, wealthy, and certainly wise, enjoying a little bit of time down south.
Adam, it's exciting to be, having roots in the ground now in Florida for the next month, hanging out here with the family. I will say 16 hours in a car with a 2-year-old, don't really recommend it to anyone. But the juice is worth the squeeze because now I'm in flip-flops for the next month and it's 75, 80 degrees here in Florida. Adam, fun little fact. About a 20 to 30 mile stretch of I-95 closed down around DC and Virginia over the snowstorms. And I was ahead of it by about 12 hours. So could you imagine how that would have just completely derailed the plans? But we got pretty lucky on that one.
Andy Makowitz sitting in dead stop traffic, wondering if there's enough food and water for the family, the dog, and the baby.
I'm committed.
Could have been what escaped his lips. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, man, because I saw Virginia, like I was seeing it in Virginia and whatever. But yeah, good, you made it. Good news. Good news is I was very concerned about everyone's safety because I checked in immediately to make sure that you guys were okay.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you're like, so I forgot you were down there, but you know what? To be honest with you, it is really nice. I'm getting texts from all friends and family back up north, and they were like, "Man, it's 26 degrees here right now." I'm like, "Ooh, I just had to put on the second coat of suntan lotion just to make sure I don't get burned by the pool."
I'm going to say sidebar too, because you guys are having some fun already, seeing the sights, etc. And I know what kids want because I recommended a very specific animal for little baby Rory. I call him baby Rory. I mean, he's basically an adult at this point. But I think that giraffes, that's the answer, guys. If you have kids and you have the means, buy a giraffe. I'm not saying that Andy has purchased one. I'm just saying there's certainly opportunities out there.
We purchased the rights to see one at the safari, so that happened. But let me tell you, 10 minutes of seeing giraffes. My 2-year-old is basically still talking about giraffes a day later. So highly recommend the safari for all the little toddlers that you got out there.
There you go. Listen, we will, of course, hear more as the off season begins about the adventures down in Florida for the Makowitz family. But in the meantime, there's a season finale coming up for the New York Football Giants. I'll call it a merciful end to what has been just an epic 2021-2022 season for the New York Football Giants. They're taking on the Washington Admirals, soon to be. Talked about it last episode, speculation around the name, but in the most Washington organization type of mentality, they couldn't keep the secret all the way until the beginning of February when they were set to announce it. How does the name strike you, man? Is the Admirals? Because I got to be honest with you, these nautically themed, or the Brigade was another one getting thrown out there. I mean, these names are total zeros to me. I'm going to put it that way. This does nothing for me, and it doesn't matter. It's Washington, but the Washington Admirals just sounds like a real zero.
Yeah, I don't really understand it. I mean, there was a lot of momentum around the Washington monuments because that seems to make sense, or maybe just go in a completely different direction and not try to thinly veil it around Washington, D.C. You either got to lean in and make yourself the presidents or the monuments or something D.C. related, or you have to just go completely off the reservation, like Detroit Lions, right? The Lion, there's no Lions in outside of Detroit, right? So.
Well, the problem is, okay, because again, and we'll get into this very quickly here, but if you were the Washington Monuments, I understand the connection. Also, it's an inanimate object. The idea of being a sports team is supposed to invoke, like you say, if you're going to be something, well, the Lions, even the Giants, right? You're this big, imposing figure, allegedly, not recently, not over the last decade. But it's just, I have a hard time with these names. And one of the other ones, the last things I mentioned, they said the Red Wolves was on the board there for them at one point, but they came out and said, with the trademarking, there was going to be issues and whatever. if you're a franchise, an NFL franchise with what these things are worth, and you have a name that you want, I think you should be
Just
able
go
to
pay.
go splurge. Just splurge a little, guys, and get the name you want instead of announcing like, we were thinking about it, but the price point was a little high. Hard to get the rights to the website. Like there cannot be a price tag that it's too expensive to go and do what you want to do. But hey, welcome to the NFC East 2 times a year. Admirals.
Like you said, Washington football team dysfunction with their ownership group. It is nice. Like after all that the Giant fans have been through so far this season and even the last few seasons, the last decade almost, it's nice to see another division rival just be an absolute mess, from even something as simple as picking the name to all the allegations of like the systemic
trying to kill Jalen Hurts with the railing. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Mean, it's crazy.
They got it going on. Let me a quick footnote here as well, because we're going to talk about this preview in the matchup. It's the final game of the season. Obviously, I think it's your last look at some young players for the Giants. That's probably the only thing you're really focused on. We're not going to learn anything new in the last game of the season here. Limited practices for guys like Kadarius Toney, so maybe he gets back out there for one last game. That would be nice to see. Other guys like Dexter Lawrence, COVID ramp up he's getting listed with, as well as a pectoral, so I wouldn't be shocked if you don't see him for the final game of the year. But everybody else, you'll look at some of these young players. I mentioned Jalen Smith this last episode. Also, Ellerson Smith has been getting some reps now, so keep your eyes open for them, obviously, and we'll talk about the betting line here. But the other thing, last episode, Andy, I went through, it was a bit of a bonus content, just talking about organizational stability, Ben Roethlisberger's career winding down, etc. And I went back off of that, and we talked about Kevin Zeitler. I went all the way back and looked at the Justin Pugh decision following his rookie contract. Remember, a first-round pick for the Giants. You end up not bringing him back. He signs a 5-year, $44 million deal. It's the year prior to dumping $37.5 million into Golden Tate. And it's worth noting here that just this morning, it was announced that Charles Leno Jr. for the Washington football team just signed a contract extension. It's going to be a 3-year, $37.5 million extension to keep him there with the Washington football team. And you may be wondering, who's Charles Leno and what does it matter? He has played over 1,000 reps this year, played to a 79.9 PFF grade. So he's been solid, played to a 74.6 the year prior, and going all the way back to 2019, that was a down year for him. So last 2 years has been consistent. He plays alongside a guy that I mentioned last episode, Eric Flowers, who's been at least actually a serviceable offensive lineman in spite of how his career started. And I bring him up because guess when this guy was drafted? Didn't come in through the Washington football team, but take a guess what round, Andy, that Charles Leno was drafted.
Oh, I mean, you're talking about like almost 10 years ago at this point. So
2014. Yep.
I'm going to go with undrafted.
You know what? You might as well have been 7th round, 246 selection overall. And so I just bring it up to say, spending a lot of money, Giants, you like to throw around those dollars. Even an organization that we like to make fun of and all their ineptitude, all that good stuff. They went out and brought in a veteran. Looks pretty good. And you know what they chose to do after he had a really strong season? Bring him back. Spend some money on him. Not haggle over a couple million and then ultimately cut him and take on a dead cap hit and let him go play for Baltimore. Any hoodles. Well, I just thought.
The interesting thing is he's 30 years old, right? And so he's been around the league, but he's been a serviceable offensive lineman. The Bears released him, right? And at 30 years old, he has a cap hit this year of $3.9 million. They basically signed him for $1.5 million with a $2 million signing bonus and said, we're going to try this out for 1 year. Let's see if we like it. He's played amazing. He's played over 99% of the snaps at left tackle. He's been durable. He's been consistent. Yep. And it's crazy to think that, the Washington football team has to trade Trent Williams because he just doesn't want to play there anymore. And they're like, oh my goodness, like all world, offensive tackle. What are we going to do? They actually make a really smart signing in the offseason for under $4 million, basically how much we're paying Nate Solder to be on the roster this year. And you can see exactly what's happening. It's frustrating to see other teams make these types of moves. Imagine the Giants had Leno for $3 or $4 million at right tackle this year, and then could sign him to a 3-year, $10 million a year extension. How nice would that be?
Exactly right. The opportunities, the decision-making process. So I just, it couldn't have been more timely to see that extension happen there, because originally What I was going to pull up as a part of this too was just taking a look over at Washington and letting people know, hey, who are guys that you may want to take a look at in this last game of the season that are going to be free agents? By the way, Brendan Sheriff, who's going to be 30 years old, going on 31 in next year, he's going to be a free agent, and his market value is going to be a little bit north of 10 million. And it's one of these things, now when we think about the Giants going into this rebuild, but how are you going to stem the tide? Everyone would anticipate that Will Hernandez is going to be gone. Do you maybe get in on a veteran guard just to have stability across the offensive line, and then in 1 or 2 years, depending on what the contract looks like, draft somebody, prepare for the future, right? Try to have some level of consistency. There's a number of players that you could look at over on Washington that could be potential options, whether it's an offensive lineman, whether it's a veteran quarterback who's going to be 40 years old, and Ryan Fitzpatrick coming off of an injury. But they've got veteran wide receivers like Cam Sims. You can look inside the backfield, by the way, J.D. McKissick, who's been a nice little for Gibson, a little off speed, off tempo kind of guy, pass catcher out of the backfield. Could he be someone that you'd like to have alongside your backfield tandem, maybe with Devontae Booker if the Giants moved off of Saquon Barkley? Like, these are all the guys that you can get some reasonable price tags for in the offseason, including a guy like Ricky Seals-Jones, the tight end, right? So there's a number of opportunities here to look at these players and say, are any of these guys worth getting a value purchase in the offseason? Should they be let go or moved on from by Washington?
Yeah, and that's important, Adam, because at this time of year, most people will say, all right, well, we're going to start all of our young stud players and see what they got, right? And at this point, I don't know. The cupboard's pretty bare. Like, there's no one that's on the bench that we're looking at being like, that person needs to get reps. Everyone was clamoring for Isaiah Wilson. He's not even on the practice squad anymore. He's gone because he was so bored he fell asleep in meetings, right? So he's out. He's done. And so we need to be.
Me.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, that is true. So wait, would you say that Isaiah Wilson was not committed? Is that what you would say, Adam? Or
yeah, well, they called him in and they asked, hey, do you want to be here?
I'm committed.
And they said, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea behind the Washington football team is, there are going to be some free agents. The Giants are not going to be huge spenders. They have $3 million in cap space right now in the offseason. They're going to have to look for some of these bargain, discount type players. They're not going to be at the top of the market. I'd be shocked if they're in the Brandon Scherff sweepstakes, knowing that he's probably going to get $12, $13, $14 million a year because he's been a very consistent guard in this league. And so when you think about the Giants having the 6th or 7th least amount, I think it's the 6th least cap space in all of the NFL, you're going to have to look at these mid-tier guys, the $2 to $3 million guys that you can get value out of. McKissick is a good one in the backfield, depending on what the running back room looks like. You don't think Evan Ingram's going to be here. You don't think, you think Kyle Rudolph's going to be a cap casualty. So someone like, Seals is a perfectly good example of guys the Giants should be looking at and maybe taking an evaluation at.
Yeah, it's something where, his market value for Seals-Jones is in like that $3 to $4 million range, whereas a guy like Evan Ingram is getting listed 17th best tight end in the league, mind you. He's getting listed around 6 to 7 million and closer to 7 than 6. So, that again, these are big differences of 3 or 4 million a year spending on a player that you're going to look to bring back or maybe go to free agency. So these are the kind of guys that you want the Giants to be looking at and considering, going into this offseason, Nate Solder, Austin Johnson, Billy Price, Evan Ingram, Jabril Peppers, Will Hernandez. Most of these guys that you're listing here, Nate Ebner, Danny Shelton, Reggie Ragland, who by and large, just a little footnote on him. He doesn't grade out well on PFF, but he's not supposed to be a guy that you want to have, heavy reps on. He's supposed to be a contributor. So when you have some of these injuries, that really impacts you. But all the guys that I'm listing, man, there's not a single one of them that I care. Jabril Peppers, I think, just unfortunately is a matter of circumstance, right, with the emergence of Xavier McKinney. But none of these guys are guys who go, oh, boy, I hate to lose one of them. Would I like to have Austin Johnson back? Of course, but he's going to be 27, 28 years old. I would have preferred you kept Alvin Tomlinson in the first place. So, there's no one on this list that you go, oh boy, if we lose him to free agency. And that tells you a little bit about the state of this team. The only player that I'll point out that I've pointed out all year, and I mentioned it, I think last episode as well, and that's Lorenzo Carter. Be very curious to see what his price point is and where the market value is, because he's come on strong. At the back end of this season, you haven't had everybody within that linebacking core. You've added Azeez Ojulari. I would like to have him back. But again, it probably falls into the same category of an Evan Ingram in the sense of, well, if Ingram is worth 7 and you can get another serviceable tight end for 4, you're going with the serviceable tight end. If Lorenzo Carter is closer to 8 or 9 and you can get a serviceable player at 6, that's the way that you're going to need to go because of the state of the cap situation for the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality that the Giants live in right now, is that the cap hasn't been managed very well. And of course, there's always ways to create more cap space. There's always guys that we can release. There's always restructuring. You look at different guys like James Bradbury and his big number. You might be able to get that down. You talked about Saquon Barkley at $8 million. You could get that down. The Giants can free up probably like $30-something million worth of cap space pretty quickly. But again, you can't, if Lorenzo Carter is going to make $8 to $10 million on the open market per year, you can't invest that all in Lorenzo Carter, or a third of your budget. There's so many other areas the Giants need to address. But to even further that, it almost reinforces the reason why the Giants need to go offensive line heavy in the draft, because we just don't have the money to go out and spend it on a Brandon Scherf. We have to use draft capital because we just don't have the money to do anything else to address the offensive line.
And don't forget, you always want to keep 8 to 10 million available for moves you have to make during the year. So if it instantly could free up 30 million, yeah, but a third of that is going to be earmarked for moves you're going to need to make. Now you're down to 20, et cetera. So through the draft is going to be the best option. I don't want to retread the last episode, but I want to get just your quick thoughts here, because we've talked about everything kind of coming down the pike here. Sidebar. It's been rumored that the Manning brothers have been building all of their capital up. They didn't take any friendly contracts on teams over the course of their career because they're building towards purchasing an NFL team. The rumor is Denver, with the ties there. They like to buy maybe the Broncos, but maybe they just buy the Giants. You know what I mean? Like, he's got such a good relationship. Couldn't they, you know what I mean? Couldn't they just go in the door and say, hey, Johnny M, as his close personal friends refer to him, why don't you let the Manning boys take the helm here? Why don't you let them get involved here? Maybe just buy in as a partner to start. Wouldn't you like to have Peyton and Eli calling the shots, and maybe a little Papa Manning there, just overseeing some player personnel options?
I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have something different, a different voice, different audience? Having the Manning brothers would be great. I mean, the big issue is the Giants are currently worth $4.85 billion as of last year. They're one of the most expensive.
Get the couch cushion, fellas. Come on.
I mean, you gotta circle around some of the other wealthy, rich friends to be able to put down the bigger, chunky down payment, right?
Big question. Would you sell the giraffe if it would help move the needle on the Mannings getting the Giants?
I mean, if it means that we're getting a full overhaul, giraffe's got to go,
Right. Because listen, in the short term, Rory's going to be upset, but in the big picture, he'll, as he gets older, going to be very excited to be a part owner of the New York Football Giants. The real question that I wanted to get to was, everything is trickling down here. Mara's been terrible. We know that Gettleman's going to be gone. The coordinator there, players are back, all this stuff, right? All this effect. But the one thing that I mentioned that I wanted to just get your take, I know Joe Judge, it feels like things are going off the rails for him now too. But we had said about the time that he was brought in that as he started his head coaching career, you would think he was becoming a bigger voice in the room, personnel-wise. And I just quickly, all of the drafts, I went all the way back to Jerry Reese on the last episode and highlighted the first-round picks and how bad they've been. But this past draft, Kadarius Toney, Ojulari, Aaron Robinson, Ellerson Smith, Gary Brightwell, Rodarius Williams. Couple of injuries in there, but everybody shy of Gary Brightwell, a late-round pick, has been a solid selection and looks like they're going to be good for this team, assuming they all get healthy. And the year prior, Thomas McKinney, Matt Pert looks like a miss, Darnay Holmes, Shane Lemieux, come back healthy, special teams contributors in Brown and Coughlin, and then even Tate Crowder's played a lot of reps but hasn't graded out fantastic. The last 2 drafts have been good. Is there any world where you give Joe Judge that longer leash if we agree that he's been a bigger proponent of who you've brought in these last 2 years and the drafts have looked more successful? The hit rates have been better for the Giants. If we can attribute some of that to Joe Judge, then we can look at him maybe in more of that, architect of the team as opposed to solely from what the results have been on the field.
That's it's impossible to separate things the way that you have. I like how you tried to do that, where you're like, hey, things have looked good. He's done this, but to be honest with you, Adam, I don't think it's possible because even if I mean, we're trying to figure out how much credit we're giving Joe Judge. Okay, so you're giving him credit for the talent, but you're not giving him credit. Like, so you're saying he had no involvement in Kenny Golladay signing an $18 million a year deal? Are you saying Gettleman was like, Joe, I'll let you be in the draft room. You can pick those players. But when it comes to free agents, that's my bag. Like, you can't separate the two the way that some people would want to. So all these free agent signings have to be like, if you're going to give him credit for some of those, you got to give him credit for spending on Kyle Rudolph. You have to give him credit for getting rid of Kevin Zeitler. You have to give him credit for bringing in Kenny Golladay. Like, so it's been such a mixed bag. Talent evaluation, it's tough because there are different people in the building for those jobs and those roles. So we can't just say, oh, we're going to give him kudos on those pieces. But the fact the Giants are 4-12, are in cap hell, and have made terrible free agent signings, that has nothing to do with Joe Judge himself.
Well, given all the indications that Joe Judge is going to be back next year, I'm just trying to find a silver lining. So do what you will with that. I'm not sure if I'm fully committed to it. And by the way, all this stuff, as I said, and we said, once this season ends in a few days, we're going to turn that table over, run through the roster, evaluate everybody. Who do we want back? Who don't we want back? What are the price points going to be? The free agents, the draft, all of these things. We're really going to try to gear it up as we hit the offseason. But before we do, it's the matchup with WFT, soon to be, a.k.a. the Admirals. The Giants are at home, and they find themselves getting 7 points with an over-under of 37.5 in this one, man. Again, here's Washington, a team that wanted a veteran quarterback in Ryan Fitzpatrick. He gets hurt. They turn back to Heineke, who showed a little flash last year. They've dealt with issues of their own, and yet they've been a competitive football team all season long. They've been in games. They had opportunities. Going back to that matchup with the Eagles just a couple of weeks ago, could have turned the tides and been fighting for a wild card spot. What do you see when you look across to that organization? Because at the start of this year, I think that we very much all felt the Giants were right in the mix to be the second best team in this division. And now it feels clearer than ever that they are as deep in the basement as they possibly could be. And it's not like the talent for Philadelphia, the talent for Washington is so much higher than the New York Football Giants, which is what cuts the legs out from underneath this idea that Joe Judge is doing things well.
Well, the hardest part for me about all this, look, the Washington football team had an awesome defense last year. The reason why they're not successful is their defense regressed significantly this year. They weren't getting pressure. They had a ton of injuries that they've dealt with. Now, every team deals with injuries. Some are bigger than others. The problem is Washington's still competitive. Like, Ron Rivera has them playing hard, has them in games, has them winning games they probably shouldn't. And like, they went into the season with Ryan Fitzpatrick as their quarterback. He gets hurt, and Taylor Heineke comes in and throws 20 touchdowns with 15 interceptions, is thrown for 3,500 yards, has been serviceable, right? So, like, when we talk about these injuries, Daniel Jones goes down. The Giants can't score a touchdown. Like, they literally have scored one touchdown in the last, 25 possessions.
They weren't scoring much even when they had Daniel Jones.
Well, exactly. I mean, Daniel Jones was averaging about 17 and a half, 18 points a game when he was in there. Now, all of a sudden, we've moved, which is not great, but now we've moved over to the Mike Glenn and Jake Fromm era, and we can't crack double digits. So it's really tough. And you just look over at Washington, and this is what frustrates Giants fans. It's like, even with them getting decimated with injuries on the defensive side of the ball, and even with them struggling on offense, they still have won more games than the Giants. They still look like they can put up points with someone like Taylor Heineke, who's their backup quarterback. It makes Giant fans frustrated. Like, how is it so bad? How has it gotten so bad on offense for us where, like, scoring one touchdown in a game is successful?
Yeah, but and to your point, they've been competitive in spite of losing Chase Young. And you talk about the defense. Now, the defense was struggling even when he was there, but he goes down. He's obviously the crown jewel of the defensive side of the ball. They lose their starting quarterback in Ryan Fitzpatrick. They lose Schweitzer, one of their offensive linemen. They lose Logan Thomas, their starting tight end. They lose J.D. McKissick, who's supposed to be a rotational piece in their offense. They lose Landon Collins, who's the starting safety on this team. They lose a center. They lost Jones for a little bit there, the backup tight end at one point. They've also lost Cosme, who's their starting rookie offensive tackle. He goes down. They also didn't have Curtis Samuel, their free agent wide receiver signing. So it's like, and then you can look at any team in the NFL and see this. And I think this is the piece where no matter what, even when we talk about all the injuries for the Giants and the offensive line and what could have been, no, it's not a what could have been. Because if you tell me that Daniel Jones was 100% healthy and played all year long, and if you told me that Nick Gates didn't get injured and they didn't lose Shane Lemieux, would it have been better? Yes. But do I sit there and go, and they could have 6 wins right now going for 7 or 7 wins going for 8, right? Could have been 8 and 9 team. No, it couldn't have been, honestly. It couldn't have been because every team deals with this, and the good teams or the teams that have the right baseline, they find a way to tread water, right? The Giants should have won 7 games this year with all of these injuries if they were a well-run team who understood how to manufacture some success. These injuries just expose the fact of how far away they are and where all of these holes really still exist across the roster. Well,
the other thing, and I'm going to take a step back to comments that were made during the week by Joe Judge saying, like, look, we had to tear it down from the studs to get the culture back. And he takes a subtle shot at the Washington football team and says, you don't see our players punching each other on the sidelines, and basically referring to the incident that the Washington football team had, when they got destroyed by the Cowboys. And I kind of sat there, and the more I thought about it, I'm like, well, maybe we should have guys getting angry on the sidelines. Like, that goes to show that they're not happy about losing games. They're fired up. Those guys have known each other for years. They're like, it's brothers arguing. And to me, it just seems like, hey, we don't have guys, punching each other, pushing each other on the sideline. It's like, well, maybe we need that fire because the Washington football team has won more games than the Giants. They scored 30 points against this Giant defense. The Giants have not scored 30 points in years. And so, like, to me, it just seems like a really strange place to be as a Giant fan. Like you said, the big 2 free agent acquisitions for the Washington football team were Ryan Fitzpatrick and Curtis Samuel. And Samuel has 10 catches, and Ryan Fitzpatrick played a quarter of a game. And they still managed to be competitive throughout all of this. So it's frustrating to see. It's tough. I'm glad that this is the last game of the season so that we don't have to continue to do some kind of charade about like who we're looking at or what's going on. And we can finally start focusing on the offseason and what needs to change before game 1 of next year.
Yeah, you better believe it. And it does go back to, I had mentioned the James Bradberry comments where basically, you take every opportunity you can, you try to make plays, do whatever you can. And I think to your point, a little bit of separating, right, from, hey, the defensive unit is doing everything that we can. We're trying to get better on a game-to-game basis, and we're almost ignoring what's happening on the offensive side. Every time we go out there, we say, hey, how do we have a good defensive series? And we don't worry about what's happening offensively. And to your point, listen, I don't like when you see infighting within a team, but especially on the offensive side, and it's hard with all the injuries, but who's trying to fire things up, right? Who's trying to make it happen? Saquon Barkley runs for 100 yards for the first time all year against Chicago, and you want to be happy about it. But then you also kind of sit there and go, yeah, but did Chicago care that he was running for 4.3 yards, 4.5 yards per carry? Or was he just kind of counting down the clock in a lot of ways that the Giants defensive players were counting down the clock until this thing was over? So it's been that kind of season. It's been that kind of frustration. And Joe Judge in that regard, boy, is that's a bad look. And there was a lot of moments in that press conference, but sitting here and throwing shade at a team that, again, up until a week or two ago, legitimately was still in the conversation to possibly be going to the playoffs. They had opportunities there to win some games. Didn't work out for them, but there's no world where you look at Washington right now, they're 6-10. But again, 2 weeks ago, anything was possible. They could have got a couple of big wins and at least been in the conversation. And if they win this game on Sunday, as we'll get into our selections, game picks here, if they win this game, being a 7-win team with everything that they dealt with, again, this is exactly what you would have wanted the Giants to do. Go 7-10 with everything you dealt with. That's how you come out of the season feeling positive. Being a 4-win team makes you feel like you're so much further away. That being the case, man, how do you want to close out the season? You want to go bold? Giants make a big statement at home. Let the fans know that Jake Fromm is the future franchise quarterback here as he gets another crack as a starting QB. Where's your gut, Andy? Tell me, from Florida, Where's the wind blowing you?
So it may be embarrassing to even say this, but honest debate. What is
Okay.
more likely for the Giants in this game? Is
What?
it that the offense can score 2 touchdowns or the offense scores 0 points?
Oh, they're closer to 0 than 2. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
We saw what happened with Jake Fromm when he was out there before. He got benched back from Mike Glennon after everyone was like, "Oh, we've seen enough of Mike Glennon." Apparently not. We had to go back to him. Um, Honestly, Adam, it's the end of the season. I don't want the Giants to do anything crazy. Why don't we just like kneel the ball down or run it a couple times into the line and go punt it again? Like we don't want
Sorry,
we don't
sorry,
want to.
sorry. Just by the way, closer to 14 or 0. Their last 3 games combined, they scored 19 points.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
And
maybe.
we want to get to 14 in a single game? Golly.
Well, I said 20-6 was my prediction against Chicago. We
Not
scored
bad.
3, and they scored a little bit more than that because of some
Mhm.
safeties and some other things. But it's like that's the world that the Giants are living in as we close the season out. It's will they score a touchdown or not? And how close and how competitive can they keep it? With Jake Fromm, I haven't been sold on him. I didn't know what Giant fans were going to expect. I saw exactly what I would expect. An under a mediocre to below average arm on a guy that's been here for 2 weeks on a team that has a very porous offensive line. I'd be
Sure.
shocked if the Giants score a touchdown in this game. Maybe there's some trick plays. Maybe there's some things to be had, just like have some fun or try to get Kenny Galladay a touchdown. Uh, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 17-6 Washington football team, similar to what I thought would happen in the Chicago game. I think that Taylor Heineke can put up points, and I think the Giants can't score them. It's going to be a really tough sledding to be able to even get a touchdown in this game, Adam.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Washington football team comes in averaging just under 20 points a game. The Giants had hovered around 17-ish with some fluffy, pictures along the way. So, on the one hand, you could say, oh, they'll both hit their averages and the Giants will lose 20-17, right? Like, just hit your marks and it'll be a close game. But as we've seen over the last few weeks, this is usually, we'll give them one more score and take obviously at least a touchdown away from where the Giants have been. And I think that that's probably more where you find yourself, I actually think that Washington can put up points. Like, I think that they can score again because the defense ends up out there so long. The offense is so inept. The curious thing for me is if we're talking about things to watch for, too little, too late from a play calling standpoint, but you saw some wildcat with Saquon Barkley last week. It just, hey, this is what we're committed to. If you get Kadarius Toney back this week, you're going to see him get used in the wildcat too. You're going to see him throw some passes. Let's do this before we go. Over under. If you have Kadarius Toney out there on the field in this game on Sunday, over under 4 pass attempts for Kadarius Toney.
Under. I'm hoping for the under. I don't want the Giants to do anything crazy. I don't want Kadarius Toney to like shatter his arm or tear his knee up in the meaningless game trying to do some crazy pass plays. Like, just get out of this game with no debilitating Achilles or ACL tears for any of the players. We want the Giants to have a top 5 draft pick. Let's all quietly go into the offseason and hopefully rebuild this team from the start, starting on Monday. I mean, it's
So
that simple.
you just want it to be like the Chicago game. You want them just to hand the ball up. And by the way, you mentioned young guys. You'd actually prefer it, regardless of how you feel about Saquon Barkley in his future, you'd rather it be Gary Brightwell. 30 carries. You want 30 carries for Gary Brightwell, 7 pass attempts for Jacob Fromm. That's it. You want to just bleed this clock out and be done. If you could, you would just as soon have the Giants walk out and say, we lose. Thanks so much. We'll see you next year.
Imagine Saquon runs in this meaningless game and he tears his Achilles or he hurts his knee. Then all the conversations about trading him in the offseason, then all the conversations about what we've got. Then we go into a whole offseason of an $8 million running back with a second torn ACL coming into the final year of his deal. That would be a mess. Like, imagine Kenny Galladay, has a huge, debilitating injury. What are we supposed to do with him in the offseason? There's no benefit. And the better the team plays, the worse our draft capital and our assets end up becoming. Like, there's no upside to beating the Washington football team in this game. I want everyone to just chill out, play the game as is, and let the chips fall where they may. No crazy trick plays where all of a sudden, like, Kadarius Toney's getting blindsided and now he's out for the start of next season.
Yeah. With some guys like him, I agree with you. With other players like Kenny Golladay, there's just little sense of, which, by the way, I think Leonard Williams won the Ernie Accorsi Good Guy of the Year for the New York Football Giants. Kenny Golladay was up there on that list. It's an award amongst the Giants team. But there's some of these guys where I'm like, man, maybe you do need to, and I guess you're right, because it's Jake Fromm. Like, what is he going to do? How's Kenny Golladay going to show something? I don't know. Maybe you're right, but it's such a fine line. You had a bad season. The coaches have been bad. Some of the players have been bad. So you get rewarded by taking off the last game of the year. Like, whatever. If any fans show up to this game that are Giants fans at home, it's like you got to give them something. But you're probably right. 17-16 is my prediction, by the way. New York Football Giants victory. So riding it down the line here. I think it's week 4 consecutive weeks calling for a 17-16 win. It's completely legitimate. It means everything in the world. We'll come back in. We're going to listen. We'll break this down. We'll dive more into the offseason. Obviously, I could go on with jokes galore here and really drag out this conversation, but you can follow us on social media, as we say. You can follow us on YouTube, where we're going to be dialing it up. Again, a lot of content is going to be kicking off here as we try to rejuvenate our dedication to the New York Football Giants with the optimism and hope of what could be going into next year. And before Andy gets us out of here, might I leave you with this? Being a New York Football Giants fan may go ahead and fill you with a little bit of a sense of, what's next? When you reach the bottom like this, what do you do now? Well, your heart is free. Now, have the courage to follow it. That's Malcolm Wallace. That's Braveheart. Follow your heart, New York Football Giants fans, even if it leads you to the Washington Admirals. We'll still be here. We'll still be following the team. And as Andy Makowitz wants, needs, and nay, demands the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.